Welcome back, everyone. We have Noel here, and Noel, you're going to be talking to us about Norman Sicily. Tell us what the connection is with the history of Malta in this case here.
Hello, Mel. Thank you for having me again. So today we're going to talk about Norman Sicily. And we're going to talk about Norman Sicily because I would like to remind the audience that we had two questions in the previous episode. One is, if the Christian community survived under the Arabs and harks back to the Byzantine period, then why are the Christian words in Maltese of Arabic origin and not of Greek origin? And the second question is, why are Maltese Christians in the 15th century named Muhammad? And
Okay.
in order to try to find an answer for these questions, then we shall look at the Norman Kingdom, what's sometimes referred to as Regno, no? Il Regno della Sicilia. Mela. Um, so the Norman Kingdom, you can divide it into, Dalli divides it into three stages. You've got from 1072 to 1130, which was the uh, subsequent to the conquest of Palermo. You've got the Normans that are consolidating their conquest and establishing the kingdom. Thereafter, you've got another period in which the relationship between the Christian rulers and the Muslim subject is gradually entrenched. And finally, we have another period in which there is a civil war mostly between the Lombards and the Muslims, right? Which finally leads to the breakup of the kingdom itself and the expulsion of the Muslims. Now, what we have to remember, Metcalfe reminds us that we have to remember certain important misconceptions. The Norman invasion of Sicily was not really an invasion, and the Normans were invited by Amir ibn al-Thumma. So, just like the Arabs conquered uh, Sicily by being invited by the usurper in Sicily, the Byzantine usurper in Sicily, to aid in the civil war against the Byzantine emperor, and just as what happened in Spain, right, when the Visigothic king probably invited the Arabs to help him in the civil, sorry, not the king, there was a civil war and the Arabs were invited there. So too here, we've got the Normans being invited by an Arab Amir to help him in the civil war. The Norman kingdom itself was not Norman in the sense of if we think about the Norman kingdom in England, and the Normans looked to emulate more Byzantium and Cairo and the Phrygia, and therefore calling it the Norman kingdom, calling it Norman may mislead. And at the height of the kingdom, Palermo was the most populous and wealthiest city in Europe, and it was also mostly inhabited by Arab Muslims.
So, if the Norman kingdom was not Norman, then in what sense was it called Norman?
Because they were connected by blood with the Normans.
Okay.
So I don't know exactly the it's a good question. But in history we always called it Norman, but he cautions that it was not Norman in the same sense that it was Norman in England. We shouldn't
Okay.
like think of them as the same, but they were probably more similar with Byzantium, Cairo, and the Phrygia.
Okay. So culturally they were different. Maybe their
Exactly, yes,
blood
yes.
connection was okay. Gotcha.
The blood was the same. The
Yeah.
blood was the same with the Normans in England and the Normans in the Crusader states. But uh, they were not the same as the Normans they were Norman because they were from Normandy. That's where their origin was. Normandy, north of
Okay.
France. You've got some that went to England, others that went down to South Italy, from where we have then Count Roger, and also Robert Guiscard, his brother. And they met, then finally had a kingdom of South Italy and Sicily. And
Okay.
another branch went to establish the Crusader state. Now, to understand better the Norman period, we need to talk what came before it and therefore the Arab period. Just a refresher, this is the map view of the Arabs, the Abbasid Caliphate, and the Aghlabis that were nominally under the Abbasids. This is during the Arab conquest of Sicily. Now, the Arabization, the conquest of Sicily took about a century, and we have about another century in which the Byzantine forts that still held out were subdued. Now, so after this period, then we have the Fatimid Caliph Al-Mu'ids, uh, who ordered the building of mosques, strengthening of fortifications, urbanization of rural areas, but of this, nothing happened. And this is the intention was to Arabize the island. Now, by the mid 11th century, Sicily was mainly Muslim and almost everyone understood Arabic. And for those that are studying the hadiths, maybe, and it's interesting that in 888, the Aghlabids ordered that all Christians were to wear a badge depicting a pig, and Jews were to wear a badge depicting a monkey.
Mm.
Now, the conquest of Sicily uh, took one of these six patterns here. Um, it was not everywhere the same. Some Byzantine forts held out. Others they negotiated a deal. So therefore, the result is a socio-religious patchwork. However, geographically, we can still see a trend with the south being more Arab and the south being more Arab and Muslim, and the north rather more than the north, right? So, for example, we've got the Val de Mazara and Val di Noto, particularly Arab and Muslim, whereas in the north, in the Val d'Amone, um, Greek and Latinate communities persisted, and Christians were still conspicuous during the Arab period. Now we had to see the Sicilian society in the Arab period. What we have is you've got at the extreme ends persons that are either Greek Christian or Arab Muslim. However, the majority of the population was bilingual Arabic and Greek. So the population knew how to speak Arabic and Greek. And this Arabic Greek bilingualism was found across the whole range of socio-linguistic spectrum. And even the most Christian and Greek speaking enclaves learned Arabic as a second language. Now there is debate on whether uh, what is the nature of the population, whether it was the locals were assimilated into Arabic and Islam, or whether they were repopulated by Muslims. Probably what happened was something in between. In certain areas, the people fled, and then it was repopulated by Muslims. In others, it was assimilated. The people were assimilated, and therefore, by the mid 11th century, this process resulted that it- in a society in which, for example, it was hard to distinguish even between the Ifriqiya and the local Sicilians. So much so that when in the mid 11th century, the Kalbits proposed to lift the Haraja tax on the Ifriqiya, the counter argument was that the Ifriqiya and the Sicilians had to intermarry so much that you couldn't distinguish one from the other. And Arabic was also used as the unifier of the state. So by the time of the Norman conquest, the Berbers in Sicily were Berber in name only. And the same process was had begun in the Greek speakers. So the Greeks began to be acculturated. Now, according to Metcalfe, in the late 1900s, the well-traveled Levantine geographer Al-Muqaddisi, he could not understand Maghribi Arabic, which is a bit, I don't know, it's a bit quite strange, that 300 years after the conquest of Afriqiya, and we have the Levantine geographer Al-Muqaddisi who couldn't understand Maghrebi dialects. Uh, Metcalfe also reminds that even in Afriqiya there were still some forms of Romance dialects, and this was corroborated by Al-Idrisi in around the 1200s. So Metcalfe concludes that instead of dying out, Greek influenced Maghribi Arabic so much that a new variety was born, which is Siculo-Arabic. Now, I don't really understand this conclusion because in although, as we saw in the linguistic theme, there is Greek in Maltese. Well, first of all, the closest relative to Siculo-Arabic is Maltese. Now, we found that we saw in the linguistic theme that there is a little bit of Greek in Maltese, but even to this day, when Maltese is not as Arabic as it was before, we can still communicate with the Arab world to a certain extent, but we can still do. But to say that you don't understand the locals is a bit, I don't know, it's a little bit strange. Maybe he was not here, he thought he was hearing Maghrebi Arabic, and instead he was, I don't know, maybe he was hearing Berber or Latin dialect. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. At the same time, we have another traveler, travel writer and geographer called Ibn Hawqal from Nisibis, which is not far from the Levant as well. His name was Muhammad Abu Qasim ibn Hawqal, was also known as Abu Qasim bin Ali bin Hawqal al-Nasibi. As you can see, again, we have Al-Qasim. And he said that Palermo had barely a trace of Christian culture left. And large numbers of Muslims in rural areas have imperfectly embraced Arabic Islamic norms. And again, he couldn't understand the people speaking in the countryside. He notes also that some Christians were Arabized in speech and in dress. Now, what's interesting that he notes is that the Muslim Christian, that there were a lot of Muslim Christian intermarriages, especially in the countryside. And what is interesting is that, well, first of all, the Muslim males with the Christian females. But what's interesting is that the marriage was allowed as long as the boys become Muslims like their father and girls become Christians like their mother. So this is very interesting. Maybe Islamic marriage practices were still developing, or it's also interesting that I was listening to a lecture by Dr. Abramson, and he said that in Judaism, you are Jewish according to your mother's line, not according to your father's line. So I don't know. Maybe the Christians at this time were more like conscious of or draw their lineage from their mother rather than from their father. So he also called them Mushhamidum, Mushhamidum, Mushhamazum, sorry, from Hebrew, which is Meshhumadim. Now this is interesting because in Arabic, as we know, Muslims, sorry, apostates are not called a Hebrew term, right? But they're called murtad. So it's very interesting here that he's using a Hebrew term. And the reason was with the aforementioned marriage practices. He also knows that they don't pray, don't perform ablution, don't pay the alms tax, the zakat. They don't go to pilgrimage. And according to Metcalfe, the reason can be that the Christians converted in name only. Now let's go to the Reconquista, of Sicily. So basically, when the Normans were invited over, right, in 1061. So at this time, the Sicily was fragmented. It's not like one emirate, and what mattered more was the parochial. You've got different regions. They were fighting together. You've got Christians, Jews, and Muslims of one region fighting the Christians, Jews, and Muslims of another region. And when the Normans came and they sided with one, it's not that they banded together against the Normans, but they were fighting each other. And the reconquistas of Sicily and Iberia were done in the same manner as the Muslim conquest, basically by blockade rather than pitched battles. And finally, the result was that the Christians were freed from dhimmitude, and now the Muslims were the new dhimmis. And it is now the Muslims that had to pay the jizya. Now, the life for the Muslims under Christian rule was not too bad. I mean, okay, they had the mosque was converted back into a cathedral, but let us not forget that this mosque was also a church during the Byzantine period. So the khutbah was abolished, possibly to prevent socio-political discourse against the Normans. The khutbah is when you've got the imam and the imam is explaining the sermon, basically. The sermon, that's the word. The sermon during the Friday prayers. Now, by the mid 1090s, Muslims had succumbed to the Christian rule relatively peacefully. However, they were allowed to keep their faith, their culture. It was okay to be a Muslim. They were even employed with the Normans, and they were actually used to capture Salerno in 1076. And in exceptional circumstances, were also discouraged from converting to Christianity. For example, we have a document called The Life of Saint Anselm, in which it was reported that Muslim soldiers wanted to convert to Christianity, but they feared the reprisal from Count Roger.
Can you explain why they were discouraged from converting?
Well,
What was going on there?
yeah, so probably what's going on here, as we shall see later, is that Count Roger was calculating, right? He was a calculating man, a strategist, and he feared a revolt from the Muslims. So the Christians here were a minority. They were a top minority, but a minority nonetheless. Um, and as we shall see, even in the next slide, actually, we'll see this same behavior here, and this time in Malta. So there was a clash between the Muslim and the Christian communities in Malta. His son, Roger II, imposed an annual fine on the Christian community for killing a Muslim. And this fine was lifted in almost a century later, when it's described as Tam Christiani quam Saraceni, like both the Christians and the Saracens of Malta, they remained loyal to the crown during this tumultuous period. What is going on here? Why are the Rogers not allowing the Christians to convert? Well, it's one story among many, first of all, because then we have other
Sorry,
stories as well.
did you mean to say not allowing the Muslims to convert?
Yes, not
Did you mean
allowing
to?
yes, not allowing the
Okay.
Muslims to convert, right here. According to this document of the life of Saint Anselm, sorry. Um, Also, we have to see that they also had their eyes set on Africa as well, so they had their possessions there as well. Later, they would have their possessions there. They had trade with Africa. Um, And also they were not afraid to fight with other Christians. For example, here they used the Muslim soldiers to capture Salerno. Right? They used Muslim soldiers to quell Christian revolt. So they had a use for the Muslims as well. They were kind of playing chess, kind of. This is what's probably going on. It was not their capture of Sicily. It was an excuse that they went to capture Sicily because it was Muslim. At the end of the day, they just wanted territory because also they attacked Christian lands as well. Now, for the normal Muslim, it didn't really change much. The life didn't really change much. Sharia was still used to solve disputes between Muslims, and even between Muslims and non-Muslims, swearing on the Quran and using the Sharia was still respected. For example, we have an account in 1177 of three Muslim villains who swore on the Quran in front of their landlord Donato Sabet of St. John of the Hermes in Palermo. Now, probably it helped that the Sicilian Muslims, well, according to Metcalfe here, the Sicilian Muslims belong to the Maliki school because in the Maliki school, they consider that bad government is better than non-government, which is reminds me of what Dr. Abramson said as well, that according to the Jews, bad government is better than no government. Here, however, we have something of a conundrum, let's say, because Metcalfe is saying that the Sicilians are belong to the Sunni Maliki school. But in the previous episode, we saw that in Malta it was Ibadi from Fiorini and Zammit. So maybe we have a patchwork here. I don't know. And also we have on the other hand, right? So on one hand we have the Malikis that are Sunnis and that they are saying that they are not as militant as the Almoravids and the Almohads that emerged later. But at the same time, we have other Malikis, for example, Al-Mazari of Mahdiya, who said that a Qadi appointed by a Christian lord could not exercise legitimate authority over the Muslims. And because of this fatwa, thousands of Muslims left Sicily in the 12th century, because it was sinful for Muslims to live under non-Muslim rule. So what we see also demographic change, right? So we've got the Muslims that are leaving from Sicily, and also we've got at the same time Christians, the Lombards coming from the north of Italy, and also the Normans that are transplanting whole communities, right? From Bugamo to Calabria, from Gerba to Sicily. So we have point is that we're having a lot of mixing of the people. Now, to answer your question, well, were they the Normans trying to propose themselves as defenders of the Christian faith? Well, it's a bit of a mixture. So they were trying to sometimes they were forcing people to convert, but in general, they left everyone to his own devices, and they also had like the palace Saracens, right? And Muslim palace Saracens, and they were giving important positions in the government as well. Um, and also, there was also a bit of a financial element because the Muslims were paying the jizya. So there was an interest in keeping them Muslim. For example, we have here a case of, again, a Qasim, Ayat Abul Qasim ibn Hamud, right? Who, although he was accused of conspiring with the Almohads, right? He was later allowed to travel and even overt a position in the Norman administration. So to
Is there,
conclude,
can I just
yes.
ask, why are you focusing on the word chasm? Is there a relevance to that?
Yes, we said that Qasim, according to the hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, Muslims shouldn't be named Qasim.
Oh, okay.
Some notable Muslims did convert to Christianity, however, um, it's difficult to know why, or whether they were forced, or maybe they were tempted by material gains. And there's no evidence of a Norman policy of widespread conversion. And by the mid 1180, Ibn Jubayr, he was marveled by the Normans' tolerance to the Muslims in Trapani. Although, on the other hand, he also recounts that if a child or woman rebels against the father, or the daughter against the mother, the child or woman goes to a church, becomes a Christian, and that's it. Their family cannot touch them. What we're trying to here is paint a picture of how the society is, so that we'll answer the question that we asked in the beginning. Now, therefore, this is the convivencia then that it's talked about, right? So it's not really a convivencia because the Christians needed to have the Muslims because otherwise their economy will collapse. Now we also have Muslim administrators, right? Um, that's how the Norman administration was composed. We got the Palace Saracens, Muslims in the army. Note how long they stayed, they were employed with the Norman kingdom, and even afterwards, right? Even after the expulsion of the Muslims. We have the interesting thing now. The Palace Saracens, they were ex-Muslims or Muslims themselves. When they converted, they took Frankish or Latin names. For example, Kite Peter, Martin, Philip, or Richard. And they were more like the Arab Islamic law courts and the Byzantines. So here we see again the Norman kingdom that's looking towards Byzantium and the Arab Islamic administrations. And some of them, they were accused of that they converted only in name and they were practicing taqiyya. And however, although they sometimes they were accused, then you've got let's say a massacre of the Saracens, of the Palace Saracens and Muslims of Palermo. However, then the Qaid Martin, who was a Muslim or an ex-Muslim, uh, ma- he put the Christians on trial. So this is to mean that the Muslims had a lot of power still. Let's look at the biggest administrator of them all. He was Emir of Emirs, George of Antioch, who knew Greek, Latin, and Arabic. Started his career working for the Byzantine Emperor, then became a financial advisor to the Zirid dynasty in Ifriqiya, and finally became a senior administrator of the Normans. And he was instrumental in financial reforms and the establishment of the Norman kingdom in the Islamic state. Now, what is interesting is that this guy first was working for the Byzantines, then he went to work for the Zirids, so he went to work for the Muslims, and then he went to work for the Normans. So there was the people also were moving around as well. the as again the administration, the fiscal, and everything, they're looking towards the Fatimid Caliphate in this case. They used Arabic, and here we have the Muslim and ex-Muslim stuff. Then they were essential in the running of the kingdom. Again, we see the merge of the Christian and the Muslim as well. However,
Just
the yes.
just a comment on that last slide is that it was a complete reverse of the situation around the year 700 when you had Christian administrators uh, working for for Arabs. at that time. So it's complete reversal where now you have Arab administrators or Christians. So just so that
Um, However, here again, we'll see that so what they're trying to do is they were not forcing the Muslims to convert, but then again, their formulas and the epitaphs, they were pro-Christian, right? And they were always having like this. So the environment was of like not overtly against Islam, but there was an undercurrent beneath, right?
Mhm.
For example, we have the royal mantle with the symbols of lions attacking camels, which, according to Metcalfe, it means the Christians attacking Muslims, and this is it, right? However, lion, the lions is the herald of the Normans, of the Norman family, and from your research, the camels are also the representative of the Arabs. So maybe we have Normans attacking Arabs here rather than Christians attacking Muslims.
Actually, interestingly, with that is the Chinese source that talks about a lion man talking to a camel herder, and that could potentially be a Christian talking to an Arab if the same symbolism was applied. But obviously, we can't assume that because it was centuries before. But it's interesting parallel.
Mhm. So this is why also then we see that in the art there is this confluence of Byzantine, Arab Islamic, and Romanesque, because again they're trying to walk a tightrope here between the balancing between the Christian forces and the Norman forces. Sorry, the Christian and the Muslim. Now, therefore, the how was the society like? It is what's termed the Populis trilinguis, the population of three languages. You've got Latin-speaking Christians, you've got Greek-speaking Christians, you've got Arab-speaking Christians, you've got Arab-speaking Muslims, and Arab-speaking Jews. Now, according to Dalli and Metcalfe, differentiating between the Arab-speaking Muslims and Arab-speaking Jews is very difficult. And there seems to have been, Dalli terms it as symbiosis between the Arab-speaking Muslims and the Arab-speaking Jews, which doesn't seem to be with the Arab-speaking Christians. This may be because the Arab-speaking Christians were called Greeks, because they were Arab-speaking Christians, but they attended the Mass in Greek. And the Sicilian Jews were difficult to identify from the Muslims and the Arabs because all of them spoke the same language, were bilingual, and had the names from the Old Testaments. What is interesting here is that when the Muslims converted, they didn't convert to the Latin rite, but they converted to the Greek rite. And also some other interesting things about the Arab Christians, which sometimes were called Arab Christians, Mozarabs, or Melkites. The Arab, it's, so Matt Calfier is saying that probably it's wrong to think of the Arab Christians and the Greek Christians as two separate groups, but it's best to think of them as one group because of the big overlap that's happening here. And I think this is quite interesting, that these two groups, the Greek-speaking Christians and the Arab-speaking Christians, there is so much overlap over them that maybe it's better to think of them as one group. And it also doesn't help, according to Metcalfe, that in the literature there is a liberal use of the word Arab and Greek. So this has led to lots of confusion because Arabs can mean Muslims, can mean ex-Muslims, can be Christians, can mean Jews. So he kind of makes this note as well. Now, what happened to these people? The Arab-speaking Muslims, they were deported in the 13th century. The Arab-speaking Jews, they were deported in the 15th century. The Greek-speaking Christians slowly declined over a period of 2 centuries. And the Arab-speaking Christians, there is no trace of them after the 13th century. So after the Muslims were expelled, the Arab-speaking Christians disappeared from the record. And this is quite baffling, right? Here is an example of interesting example of the Psalter, and that highlights this Populis trilinguis, right? In three languages: Greek, Latin, and Arabic. Now, this is another interesting slide, because in Sicily it was the script that conveyed identity, not the language. That's what do we have. We have Arabic written in Hebrew, Italo-Romance written in Greek, Greek written in Latin, Arabic written in Greek, and here we have another example of in Spain as well, in which we've got Spanish written in Arabic, what's called the Alhamiado. And finally, we've got Maltese, which is a vestige of this process, which is Arabic written in Latin. So it's quite interesting that you have all these languages written in different scripts, right? When I discovered this, I was quite shocked, to tell you the truth. Now, of course, then here Metcalfe then continues with the of this overlap may have extended even in other parts of the Arab world, for example, in Abbasid Iraq, right? And that's how the Greek knowledge, because of this large overlap, that's how the Greek knowledge was translated into Arabic, both in Iberia, in Iraq, and finally in the Norman kingdom, which led to the foundation of the Renaissance. The translations in the Norman kingdom led to the Renaissance in northern Italy. Now, meat and potatoes of the whole presentation, finally, we're going to look at the names and whether the names we can have a religious, we can get, we can guess the religious adherence of from the names. Now, most of the names in the Norman period, they were Arab Islamic. The rest were Greek, Latin, or Frankish. Some people had mixed names, and others had alternative names. So they would say, for example, let's say if I am saying Mel, let's say, like Mel would say he in Ireland himself Mel, but if he goes to, for example, I don't know, Italy, he would call himself Melchior, for example.
Mhm.
However, because of this big overlap, we get this knowledge, this information from fiscal registers. We can know the religious adherence of the person, and from studies of these names of these registers, then the conclusion is that we cannot assume that because a person has an Arab name, then the person is a Muslim, or that if a person has a non-Arab name, then it means that he is a convert from Islam or he is non-Muslim. For example, what we have in an example of a Maltese slave, a Maltese Muslim slave who was expelled to Lucera, whose name is Riccardus Maltesi. If you think of Riccardus Maltesi, you don't think that he is a Muslim, but in reality he was a Muslim. He was baptized, and then he was renamed Philippus de Luceria. We also have, for example, the Peter, who was known by his Frankish name Baron, and when he fled Sicily to work for the Almohads, which is interesting, he took the name of Ahmad al-Sikili, or al-Sikili. So from Peter, he became Ahmad. We've got the Sicilian Christian Amir Eugenius Tokolo, which means the good, was also known as Abu Tayyib. Abu Tayyib is in Maltese. We've got also Emir Christodoulos, who was also known as Abd al-Rahman al-Nasrani. We've got also another example, a Greek document between Christodoulos and Sitt al-Husun. So this Greek document, which was written and signed in Greek, right, it was between Christodoulos with to Sitt al-Husun. Now, what's interesting is this. Christodoulos was the son of Abu Sayyid. Sitt al-Husun was the daughter of Peter of Castronuovo, who signed in Latin. And Sitt al-Husun was the wife of Abd al-Said. And the witnesses were Simeon, who signed in Arabic, son of Andrea Raham. And the other one was Theodore, who signed in Greek, Leo al-Hanzari. So here we're again seeing the mottled nature of the society during the Norman period. We have another example of Corleone, where we have Mahuna, who had a son called Nikephoros, who had two sons called Hilfa and Abu Ghalib. Now, we have also Christians who had their names Arabized forms of the Greek, for example, Herakli from Heraklios, or BRN Kat from Pancratius. And what's crucial is this, the smoking gun, finally. We've got Christians that were named Muhammad, Abdullah, Hamoud, Ahmad, and we even find an Ali. So, therefore, it's no surprise then why in Malta we can find a Christian named Muhammad in the 14th century. Just also a side note here is that this is the time that Benjamin of Tudela traveled to and described the interactions between the Caliph and um, the Exilarch. So while he was there in Sicily and probably Malta, because the custom kept going on until the 14th century, we've got Christians that are named Muhammad, Abdullah, Hamoud, Ahmad, and Ali. And according to Metcalfe, these are not new recent converts because, again, of the societal structure that we have just described. Now, we can also have some namesakes, right? So, for example, we've got Christodoulos or Christodouola, that their namesake would be Abdel Masih or Abdullah. So, if, for example,
You mean when you say namesake, are you talking about alias or what do you mean?
yes, yes, known as, for example, if he's talking in Greek, he would call himself Christodoulos, but then if it's in an Arabic context, it would be Abdel Masih or Abdullah.
Okay.
If it was Muhammad, it would be the same as it would be Banzul. Now, Banzul, no one knows what does it mean. And it's interesting also this duality between Peter and Ahmad. Now, Christodoulos and Christodouala, when I first read this, right, I didn't make much of it because I said, okay, Christodoulos, Abdel Masih, it's like the slave of Jesus, and Abdullah is the slave of God. But I don't know, from last live stream, well, Allah is, Jesus is also Allah, so kind of it makes sense. No, both are the same. But then when I heard the live stream that you had last time with Murad and Dr. Smith, I was wondering whether, and Murad said that Abdullah in the Quran, according to Christoph Luxemburg, could mean Jesus. So when I again saw this, when I was preparing for today, it's like, but actually, could this be a vestige as well? Because why Abdullah and Abdul Masih? Why for Abdullah they didn't write, for example, Theodoros, right? Kind of it matches more Theodoros than rather than Christodoulos, Abdullah. I don't know. Is it clear or
Yeah. Well, I presume they, gone back centuries, they would have called Jesus servant of God. That would have been a certain
Mhm.
type of thinking within Islam, so that, that parallel came along. It'd be interesting to find out what Banzul might
Mhm.
mean in Greek.
I tried to search, but
Yeah,
found didn't find anything. What is
yeah,
interesting as well is this one between Peter and Ahmed. Now, Ahmed, if I recall correctly, that was also related with the praised one, no?
yeah. It's just a variation of Mahmed. It's
Exactly.
basically it's a synonym really for Muhammad.
Eg- yeah.
So I yeah, I don't know why they've depicted it. There mightn't be it on the face of it. It doesn't look like there's any significant
Mhm. But
reason.
do you
Yeah,
remember when you had the Alawite presentation with
yeah,
Judaism? And it's
hmm
interesting here that in Alawites they have this duality between Peter and Jesus, and here
Oh
we
yeah,
have
yeah. I
Peter and
remember that.
Ahmed. So it's interesting that
Yeah.
there is this duality here as well.
Well, I would say that the duality there is probably because in the Quran it talks about Ahmed coming later, so it splits the Messiah into two types. So it's kind of paralleling the Messiah bin Joseph followed by the Messiah bin David. So the Quran seems to be referring to Ahmed. By referring to Ahmed there, it seems to be referring to Messiah bin David, perhaps. That could be the parallel. Yeah, it's a bit confusing.
Yeah, and that's all I have for today, actually.
Yeah, I suppose just one final thought is is in terms of when the names were given, because Christians take on the baptismal name. Um, it seems like these are not baptismal names, but basically birth
No.
names.
Yes, yes, yes. So they would be
And
known in depending on the context, right? If they're speaking in Greek, then they would use one. So for them, it was I don't know. What comes to mind is, for example, I had Chinese friends, and they had, for example, for a certain name, they would say James, for example. They would make this comparison. I'm trying to find an
yeah,
example, you know?
yeah, it's very interesting. I'm very curious about Banzul. Um,
Mhm.
just what does it remind me of? There is something that's
I don't know.
what's this? No,
I don't
I'm
know.
clutching at straws here. But
Yeah.
right, excellent.
Okay.
Any final thoughts?
No, it's so finally then at the end of the day we saw this great overlap. So it's no surprise then that the first of all that we have Muhammad, we have finally a smoking gun, another example in Corleone, where Christians are naming themselves as Muhammad, and also it's also not so surprising then that the Greek Christian community in Malta adopted, um, uh, sorry, that the Christian community in Malta was not speaking in Greek but in Arabic. So the answers to the questions lie in Sicily. Now we have still a problem, which is why the Arabic in Maltese, the Christian Arabic in Maltese, is derived from two sources: the Islamic and the Syrio-Lebanese. But I don't have an answer to this question.
Yeah. Yes, I suppose it's opened up a whole uh, another mystery for us. It seems like uh, people are drawn from a common culture, a pool, cultural pool, and dipping in and out of it, very, very flexibly. So other than that, it's It's I'm sure there's probably someone out there who's more familiar with Greek or Latin that might be able to shed light on Banzul. But thanks a million. What are you looking at next week?
Next week, we'll look at the why Maltese is the only Arabic language which has survived Christendom, and this probably may shed light on the histories that was going on, especially in the context of the previous live stream with um, uh, that you had with Murad and with Dr. Smith, in the sense that of the political situation that was going on in Europe and the Mediterranean, right? That everything came so late and during the Ottoman period, and maybe we can the what we are seeing in Christendom is a reaction to the Ottoman development, maybe.
Thanks. So we look forward to seeing that. So thanks a lot for dropping by, Noel,
Thank you.
and
Bye bye.
see you next week. Bye bye.